May 14th, 1993, started as a perfect spring day in Millbrook Falls, a small town of 3,200 residents nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York. The sun was shining, the temperature was a comfortable 68 degrees, and the students of Millbrook Elementary School were buzzing with excitement about their annual end-of-year field trip to Crystal Lake State Park, just 20 miles outside of town. 20 children, ages 8 to 11, had been selected to participate in the special environmental education program at the park. The trip was a reward for students who had excelled in their science classes throughout the year, and it represented the culmination of months of studying local ecosystems, wildlife conservation, and environmental protection. The group was led by Mrs. Sarah Mitchell, a beloved 34-year-old fourth-grade teacher who had organized the trip as part of her advanced science curriculum. Mrs. Mitchell had been teaching at Millbrook Elementary for 8 years and was known throughout the community for her innovative teaching methods and genuine care for her students. She had spent weeks preparing educational materials for the trip, coordinating with park rangers and ensuring that every detail was perfectly planned. Also accompanying the group was Mr. David Chen, a 29-year-old student teacher who was completing his education degree at nearby State University. Mr. Chen had been working with Mrs. Mitchell's class for the entire spring semester and had formed strong bonds with the students. The field trip was meant to be his final assignment before graduating and beginning his own teaching career. The school bus driver for the trip was Harold Hal Morrison, a 52-year-old veteran driver who had been transporting Millbrook students safely for over 15 years. Hal was known for his careful driving, his friendly demeanor with the children, and his perfect safety record. He had driven this exact route to Crystal Lake dozens of times over the years and knew every curve, hill, and potential hazard along the way. The 20 students selected for the trip represented some of the brightest and most enthusiastic young minds in Millbrook Elementary. There was Emma Rodriguez, a precocious 10-year-old who dreamed of becoming a marine biologist and could identify dozens of local bird species by sight. Tommy Anderson, age 9, was fascinated by geology and had been collecting rocks and minerals since he was 5 years old. Lisa Chen, 11 years old, and no relation to Mr. Chen, despite sharing a surname, was passionate about environmental conservation and had already started a recycling program at her home. Other students included Michael Barnes, Jessica Wu, Anthony Garcia, Amanda Foster, Kevin O'Brien, Sarah Kim, Daniel Martinez, Ashley Johnson, Ryan Thompson, Maria Gonzalez, Stephen Park, Nicole Brown, Jordan Davis, Samantha Lee, Tyler Wilson, Melissa Taylor, Nathan Clark, Jennifer Adams, and Christopher Moore. Each child brought their own unique interests, personalities, and dreams to the group, creating a vibrant and diverse collection of young learners eager to explore the natural world. The bus departed Millbrook Elementary at 8:30 a.m. sharp, right on schedule. Parents had gathered in the school parking lot to wave goodbye, taking pictures and reminding their children to listen to their teachers and stay safe. The atmosphere was festive and optimistic, with everyone looking forward to a day of outdoor learning and fun. "Have the best time, sweetheart," called out Maria Rodriguez as she watched her daughter Emma climb aboard the yellow school bus. "Learn everything you can about those fish and birds." The route to Crystal Lake State Park was well established and considered very safe. It involved taking Route 15 north for about 12 miles, then turning onto County Road 42 for the final 8 miles to the park entrance. The roads were well maintained, clearly marked, and regularly patrolled by local law enforcement. Weather conditions were perfect, with clear skies and excellent visibility. Crystal Lake State Park itself was a 2,400-acre nature preserve featuring pristine forests, hiking trails, diverse wildlife, and the centerpiece attraction, Crystal Lake, a deep, clear body of water that had been formed by glacial activity thousands of years ago. The lake was approximately 2 miles long and 1 mile wide, with depths reaching up to 180 feet in some areas. It was considered one of the most beautiful and ecologically significant natural features in the region. The educational program that the students were scheduled to participate in was called Ecosystem Explorers and was designed to give children hands-on experience with environmental science. The day's activities included guided nature walks, water quality testing in the lake, bird-watching sessions, soil sample collection, and a presentation by park rangers about local wildlife conservation efforts. Mrs. Mitchell had been in contact with park ranger Susan Walsh, who would be leading many of the day's activities. Ranger Walsh was an experienced educator with a master's degree in environmental science and over 10 years of experience working with school groups. She had prepared special materials for the Millbrook students and was looking forward to sharing her passion for nature conservation with the eager young visitors. The expected schedule for the day was precisely planned. The group would arrive at Crystal Lake State Park around 9:15 a.m., spend about 30 minutes getting organized and reviewing safety rules, then begin their educational activities at 10 a.m. Lunch was scheduled for 12:30 p.m. at the park's covered pavilion, followed by afternoon activities, including a boat ride on the lake to observe aquatic ecosystems from the water. The return trip was scheduled to begin at 3:30 p.m., which would get the students back to Millbrook Elementary by 4:15 p.m., well before the end of the normal school day. Parents had been informed of this schedule, and many were planning to pick up their children directly from school to hear about their adventures at the lake. But the yellow school bus carrying 20 excited students, 2 dedicated teachers, and 1 experienced driver never arrived at Crystal Lake State Park that morning. When 9:30 a.m. came and went without any sign of the Millbrook group, Ranger Walsh began to worry. She called the school to check if there had been any delays, but was told that the bus had departed on schedule and should have arrived by then. By 10 a.m., genuine concern was setting in. Ranger Walsh contacted local law enforcement, and Deputy Sheriff Tom Bradley was dispatched to drive the route between Millbrook and Crystal Lake, looking for any sign of the missing bus. Deputy Bradley was familiar with the area and knew that there were very few places where a school bus could have pulled off or gotten into trouble. The search began in earnest when Deputy Bradley completed his drive of the entire route without seeing any trace of the yellow school bus. There were no reports of accidents, no abandoned vehicles, and no signs of mechanical trouble. It was as if Bus 47, carrying 23 people, had simply vanished into thin air somewhere along the 20-mile journey between Millbrook Elementary and Crystal Lake State Park. By 11 a.m., the Millbrook Police Department had been notified, and Chief Robert Nash immediately declared a local emergency. Additional patrol cars were dispatched to search every side road, dirt path, and potential stopping point along the route. The state police were contacted and began coordinating a broader search effort that would eventually involve multiple agencies and dozens of personnel. At Millbrook Elementary, Principal Janet Stevens faced the horrible task of informing parents that their children were missing. Phone calls began going out just after 11:30 a.m., and within minutes, panicked parents began arriving at the school, demanding answers that no one could provide. The school quickly became a command center for worried families and law enforcement officials trying to coordinate the search effort. "We need everyone to stay calm while we figure out what happened," Chief Nash told the assembled parents. "Our officers are searching every possible route and location. We have helicopters coming in from the state police, and we're setting up roadblocks to check every vehicle in the area. We will find these children." The search expanded rapidly throughout the day. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras began flying grid patterns over the heavily forested areas between Millbrook and Crystal Lake. Volunteer search teams made up of local residents, Off-duty police officers and firefighters began combing through woods, checking abandoned buildings, and investigating any location where a school bus might have gone off the road. One of the most puzzling aspects of the disappearance was the complete lack of any physical evidence. There were no skid marks on the roads, no broken guardrails, no damaged trees, or signs of a vehicle leaving the roadway. Bus 47 was a large, bright yellow vehicle that should have been easily visible from the air, yet the helicopters found no trace of it despite hours of intensive searching. Local hospitals and medical facilities were contacted to check if there had been any accidents or emergencies involving a school bus or its passengers. Police departments in neighboring counties were alerted to be on the lookout for Bus 47 and its occupants. Even the possibility of a kidnapping or hijacking was considered, though it seemed almost impossible that such a crime could be carried out against a school bus full of children without leaving any evidence. As the day progressed and no trace of the missing bus was found, the mood in Millbrook became increasingly desperate. Parents who had cheerfully waved goodbye to their children that morning were now facing the unthinkable possibility that something terrible had happened to their young ones. The small town, where everyone knew everyone else, was united in grief and determination to find the missing students and their teachers. Television news crews began arriving in Millbrook by late afternoon, drawn by the mysterious nature of the disappearance. The story of 20 missing school children was the kind of tragedy that captured national attention, and soon reporters from major networks were broadcasting live from the steps of Millbrook Elementary. Behind me is Millbrook Elementary School, where this morning 20 students and 2 teachers boarded a school bus for what should have been a routine educational field trip, reported CNN correspondent Jennifer Walsh. Instead, families here are facing every parent's worst nightmare. Their children have simply vanished without a trace. FBI agents arrived in Millbrook that evening to assist with the investigation. Agent Patricia Rodriguez, a specialist in missing persons cases, immediately began interviewing everyone who had been involved in planning the field trip or who had seen the bus depart that morning. The possibility of foul play was being taken seriously, though the circumstances of the disappearance made a criminal explanation seem unlikely. In my 15 years with the Bureau, I've never seen a case quite like this, Agent Rodriguez told the media during a late-night press conference. A school bus with 23 people aboard doesn't just disappear without leaving some kind of trace. We're exploring every possibility and using every resource at our disposal to find these missing children and adults. The first night of the search was agonizing for the families involved. Many parents refused to leave the school, maintaining a vigil in the gymnasium where cots and coffee had been set up by volunteers from local churches. Others drove the route between Millbrook and Crystal Lake repeatedly, hoping against hope that they might spot something the professional searchers had missed. Maria Rodriguez, Emma's mother, spoke for many of the families when she addressed the media that first night. These are good kids, smart kids, kids who were excited about learning and exploring nature, she said through tears. Emma was so excited this morning, talking about all the fish and birds she was going to see. She's never been away from home overnight without calling me. Something terrible has happened, and we need to find them. The morning of May 15th brought expanded search efforts and growing media attention. The state police had deployed their most advanced search and rescue equipment, including underwater sonar units that began systematically scanning every body of water in the region. The possibility that Bus 47 had somehow ended up in a lake or river was considered remote, but investigators were determined to check every possibility. Local businesses and organizations rallied to support the search effort and the families. The Millbrook Diner stayed open 24 hours to provide free meals to searchers and volunteers. Hardware stores donated flashlights, batteries, and other equipment. Churches organized prayer services and provided counseling support for the traumatized families. As the search entered its second day, the area being covered expanded to include locations far from the original route to Crystal Lake. The possibility that Bus 47 had been hijacked and driven to a distant location was being seriously considered, leading to searches in neighboring states and alerts to law enforcement agencies across the region. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a child psychologist brought in to help support the families, observed the unique trauma that the community was experiencing. "This isn't just about individual families losing their children," she explained. "This is an entire community that has lost 20 of its youngest members all at once. The psychological impact is extraordinary, and everyone is struggling to process something that seems impossible to understand." On the third day of the search, investigators began focusing more intensively on the people involved in the trip. Background checks were conducted on Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Chen, and bus driver Hal Morrison, though all three had impeccable reputations and no history that would suggest involvement in any criminal activity. The possibility that one of them had deliberately caused the disappearance was considered but seemed highly unlikely given their known characters and circumstances. Hal Morrison's wife Dorothy became an important source of information about her husband's state of mind and activities leading up to the trip. Hal was looking forward to this trip, she told investigators. He liked Mrs. Mitchell and those kids, and he was always careful about safety. He checked that bus thoroughly before every trip, and he knew that route like the back of his hand. Something must have happened that was completely beyond his control. The school bus itself became a focus of the investigation. Bus 47 was a 1989 international model that had been well maintained and regularly inspected. Maintenance records showed that it had passed its most recent safety inspection just 2 months earlier, with no significant mechanical issues noted. The bus was equipped with basic safety equipment, but did not have GPS tracking or any other electronic monitoring systems that were common in later years. As the days passed without any trace of the missing bus or its occupants, theories began to emerge about what might have happened. Some suggested that the bus had been involved in an accident in a remote area that hadn't been searched yet. Others wondered if there had been a medical emergency that had caused the driver to deviate from the planned route. The most disturbing theories involved kidnapping or other criminal activity, though the logistics of such a crime seemed almost impossible. 1 week after the disappearance, the FBI announced that they were treating the case as a potential kidnapping and had issued alerts to law enforcement agencies across North America. Agent Rodriguez explained that while there had been no ransom demands or other typical signs of a kidnapping, the complete absence of evidence suggested that someone with significant resources and planning might be involved. "We're looking at this from every angle," Agent Rodriguez told reporters. "Whether this was an accident, a crime, or some other type of incident, someone, somewhere, knows what happened to these 20 children and 3 adults. We're asking anyone with any information, no matter how small or seemingly irrelevant, to come forward." The case attracted attention from psychics, conspiracy theorists, and amateur investigators from around the country. Tips and supposed sightings poured in from dozens of states, each one requiring investigation and ultimately leading nowhere. The FBI reported receiving over 500 tips in the first month alone, ranging from reported sightings of the bus to elaborate theories about alien abduction or government cover-ups. Local search efforts continued for months, organized by families who refused to give up hope that their children might still be alive somewhere. Volunteer groups conducted weekend searches of remote areas, followed up on tips from the public, and maintained pressure on law enforcement to continue active investigation of the case. The psychological toll on the Millbrook community was enormous. The elementary school struggled to function normally, with an entire classroom of students gone and their beloved teacher missing. Counselors worked with the remaining students, who were traumatized by the loss of their friends and confused by the inexplicable nature of their disappearance. By the end of 1993, the active search for Bus 47 had been scaled back, though the case remained officially open and continued to receive periodic attention from investigators. The families formed a support group that met regularly and worked to keep public attention focused on their missing children. Annual memorial services were held on May 14th, marking each anniversary of the disappearance. The case became one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in American history, featured in numerous television documentaries, podcasts, and true crime books. Theories about what happened to the Millbrook 20, as they became known, ranged from natural disasters to elaborate criminal conspiracies, but no evidence ever emerged to support any particular explanation. Mrs. Mitchell's husband, Robert, became a vocal advocate for improved school safety protocols and better tracking systems for school transportation. "Sarah dedicated her life to those kids," he said during a press conference on the first anniversary of the disappearance. "The least we can do is make sure that no other families have to go through what we've been through. We need systems in place so that school buses can never just vanish the way Bus 47 did." Judicish, the families of the missing children lobbied for legislation requiring GPS tracking on all school buses, improved communication systems between schools and transportation departments, and better protocols for responding to missing school bus situations. Some of these changes were eventually implemented in New York State and other jurisdictions, creating a small positive legacy from the tragedy. Over the years, several investigators took fresh looks at the case, using new technologies and techniques that hadn't been available in 1993. Ground-penetrating radar was used to search areas where the bus might have been buried. Advanced computer modeling was employed to analyze possible routes and scenarios. Cold case specialists reviewed all the evidence looking for clues that might have been missed during the original investigation. In 2003, 10 years after the disappearance, the FBI announced that they were scaling back active investigation but would continue to follow up on credible leads. Agent Rodriguez, who had been promoted to head the Bureau's Missing Persons Unit, reflected on the case that had defined much of her career. "The Millbrook 20 case taught us a lot about the challenges of investigating mass disappearances," she said. "It led to improvements in interagency cooperation, search protocols, and family support systems. While we never found those children and adults, their case has helped us find others and prevent similar tragedies." By 2010, most of the original investigators had retired, and a new generation of law enforcement professionals had taken over the cold case files. Digital databases and improved information sharing meant that any new evidence could be quickly analyzed and cross-referenced with other cases, but no breakthroughs emerged. The parents of the missing children aged and, in some cases, passed away without ever learning what had happened to their sons and daughters. Maria Rodriguez died in 2015, still hoping that someday she might learn Emma's fate. Her funeral was attended by dozens of other Millbrook families who had shared her pain for over 2 decades. Local residents, who had been children themselves in 1993, grew up with the mystery as part of their town's identity. Millbrook became known as the town where the school bus vanished, a designation that brought unwanted attention and painful memories. Efforts to move past the tragedy were complicated by continued media interest and the unresolved nature of the case. In 2018, 25 years after the disappearance, the Millbrook Historical Society created a memorial garden at the elementary school, honoring the 20 students and 3 adults who had vanished. The memorial featured plaques with each person's name and a fountain surrounded by benches where people could sit and remember. We wanted to create a place where the community could come together and honor the memory of those we lost, explained Historical Society President Margaret Foster, whose daughter Amanda had been one of the missing students. Even though we don't know what happened to them, we know they were part of our community and they deserve to be remembered. The Memorial Garden became a gathering place for annual remembrance ceremonies and a destination for people interested in the case. Flowers were regularly left at the memorial by both local residents and visitors from around the country who had been touched by the story of the Millbrook 20. As 2020 approached, the case was approaching its 30th anniversary, and most observers assumed it would remain forever unsolved. The physical evidence had gone cold decades earlier. Most of the original investigators had retired or died, and the children who had vanished would now be adults in their late 30s if they were still alive. But in 2024, 31 years after Bus 47 vanished on its way to Crystal Lake State Park, a discovery would finally provide answers to questions that had haunted Millbrook and captivated the nation for over 3 decades. The truth about what happened on that spring morning in 1993 was more shocking and heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined, and it would force everyone to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the disappearance of the Millbrook 20. On March 22, 2024, 31 years after the disappearance of Bus 47 and the Millbrook 20, Crystal Lake State Park was experiencing one of the worst droughts in recorded history. Water levels had dropped nearly 40 feet below normal, exposing areas of the lake bottom that hadn't been visible since the lake was first formed by glacial activity thousands of years ago. Dr. Amanda Chen, a marine archaeologist from Syracuse University, had received permission from the state to conduct a survey of the exposed lake bottom. The drought presented a rare opportunity to study geological formations and potentially discover historical artifacts that had been hidden underwater for generations. Dr. Chen, who had grown up hearing stories about the missing school bus from her parents, never imagined that her research would finally solve one of New York's most enduring mysteries. Dr. Chen was leading a team of graduate students in documenting newly exposed areas of the lake when her remote-operated underwater vehicle detected an unusual metal structure in approximately 60 feet of water near what had once been the deepest part of the lake. The object was large, rectangular, and appeared to be man-made, which was unexpected since Crystal Lake was a natural formation with no known history of large-scale human construction. At first, we thought it might be an old boat or some kind of construction equipment that had been dumped in the lake decades ago, Dr. Chen later recalled. But as we got better images from the ROV, the shape began to look familiar. It was long, rectangular, and had what appeared to be windows along the sides. That's when it hit me what we might be looking at. The initial underwater images were grainy and difficult to interpret, but Dr. Chen immediately contacted the New York State Police, explaining that her team might have discovered something related to the 1993 disappearance of the Millbrook school bus. Within hours, state police divers and specialized underwater recovery teams were mobilized to investigate the mysterious object resting on the bottom of Crystal Lake. Detective Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, who now headed the cold case unit that included the Millbrook 20 file, arrived at Crystal Lake that same evening. Detective Martinez had been a rookie patrol officer in 1993 and remembered the massive search effort that had failed to find any trace of the missing bus. The possibility that Bus 47 had been in Crystal Lake all along was both shocking and somehow fitting, given that the lake had been the intended destination of that ill-fated field trip. If this really is Bus 47, it means we've been looking in all the wrong places for 31 years, Detective Martinez told her team as they prepared for the underwater investigation. But it also means we might finally get answers for those families who have been waiting so long to know what happened to their children. The first dive to examine the submerged object was conducted on March 23rd by Master Diver Tom Rodriguez of the State Police Underwater Recovery Team. Rodriguez was an experienced investigator who had worked on dozens of underwater recoveries, but none had carried the emotional weight and public attention of this potential discovery. As Rodriguez descended through the clear, cold water of Crystal Lake, the outline of the object became increasingly clear. At a depth of 62 feet, he found himself face to face with a yellow school bus, sitting upright on the lake bottom as if it had been carefully parked there. The vehicle was remarkably well preserved, protected by the cold, oxygen-poor environment of the deep lake water. "It's definitely a school bus," Rodriguez radioed to the surface team. "Yellow paint is still visible, and I can see the number 47 on the back. The emergency exit door is closed. Windows appear to be intact. This is almost certainly the Millbrook bus." The discovery sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies and media outlets across the country. Within hours of the confirmation, news crews were descending on Crystal Lake State Park, and the small community of Millbrook was once again thrust into the national spotlight. For families who had spent 31 years wondering what had happened to their children, the discovery brought a mixture of relief and renewed anguish. Maria Rodriguez Jr., Gemma's older sister who had been 16 when her little sister disappeared, now a mother of 3 herself, spoke for many family members when she addressed the media outside Crystal Lake. "We always hoped we would someday know what happened to Emma and the other children," she said through tears. "Finding the bus doesn't bring them back, but it might finally give us answers about why they never came home." The underwater recovery operation was complex and delicate, requiring specialized equipment and techniques to safely raise the bus from the lake bottom without destroying potential evidence. The New York State Police worked with the FBI and underwater archaeology experts to develop a recovery plan that would preserve as much forensic evidence as possible. Dr. Michael Foster, a forensic underwater specialist brought in from the FBI's evidence recovery team, explained the challenges they faced. "A school bus that's been underwater for 31 years presents unique preservation and recovery challenges," he said. "Water can both preserve and destroy evidence depending on conditions. We need to document everything in place before attempting to raise the vehicle." Over the following week, divers methodically photographed and videotaped every inch of Bus 47 as it rested on the lake bottom. Underwater cameras captured images of the interior through the windows, revealing the heartbreaking sight of school seats still arranged as they had been on that May morning in 1993. Personal items were visible throughout the bus: backpacks, lunchboxes, and what appeared to be educational materials prepared for the field trip that never happened. One of the most poignant discoveries was a small banner visible through the front windshield that read, "Crystal Lake Environmental Explorers, May 14, 1993. Mrs. Mitchell had apparently created the banner to commemorate the field trip, and it had remained in place for over 3 decades, a silent testament to the excitement and anticipation that had filled Bus 47 on its final journey. The recovery team also discovered that Bus 47 was not alone on the lake bottom. Approximately 50 feet from the bus, they found what appeared to be a passenger car, also submerged and covered with decades of lake sediment. The car was positioned at an angle that suggested it had entered the water at a different time and location than the bus, adding another layer of mystery to the investigation. On March 30th, exactly 1 week after the initial discovery, the complex operation to raise Bus 47 from the lake bottom began. A specialized barge, equipped with heavy-duty winches and stabilization equipment, was brought to Crystal Lake, along with a team of marine engineers who had experience recovering large vehicles from underwater crash sites. The process of raising the bus was broadcast live on national television, watched by millions of viewers who had followed the Millbrook 20 case for decades. As the yellow school bus slowly emerged from the dark waters of Crystal Lake, covered in algae and sediment but remarkably intact, there wasn't a dry eye among the spectators gathered at the lake shore. Seeing that bus come up out of the water was one of the most emotional moments of my career. Detective Martinez later reflected, "You could feel the weight of 31 years of questions and grief in that moment. Families who had been waiting for answers since 1993 were finally going to learn what happened to their children." Once Bus 47 was safely on the shore, forensic investigators began the painstaking process of examining the vehicle and its contents. The bus was transported to a secure facility where it could be processed in controlled conditions, protecting both the evidence and the dignity of any human remains that might be found inside. The initial examination of the bus exterior revealed several crucial pieces of information. First, there was no evidence of collision damage or mechanical failure that might have caused the bus to leave the road. The vehicle appeared to be intact and undamaged, suggesting that whatever had caused it to end up in Crystal Lake had not been a typical traffic accident. More puzzling was the discovery that the bus had entered the water at a location approximately half a mile from the main road that connected Millbrook to Crystal Lake State Park. This area was accessible only by a narrow dirt road that was rarely used and would have required the bus driver to make a significant deviation from the planned route. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a forensic pathologist brought in to examine the scene, noted additional unusual findings. The position of the bus on the lake bottom and the way it entered the water suggests that it went in slowly and deliberately, not in a sudden plunge that you'd expect from an accident, she explained. This raises questions about what circumstances led to the bus being driven into the lake. The examination of the bus interior was even more revealing and disturbing. Forensic investigators found clear evidence that all 23 occupants had been inside the vehicle when it entered the water. Personal belongings were distributed throughout the bus in a pattern consistent with the seating arrangement that had been documented when the trip began. Most significantly, investigators discovered that the emergency exits had been locked or blocked from the outside, preventing the occupants from escaping as the bus filled with water. This finding immediately shifted the investigation from a potential accident to a clear case of homicide, as there was no innocent explanation for why the emergency exits would have been secured shut. The evidence clearly indicates that this was not an accident, FBI agent Patricia Rodriguez, now the Assistant Director of the Bureau's Criminal Investigation Division, announced during a press conference. Someone deliberately drove this bus into Crystal Lake and took steps to ensure that the occupants could not escape. We are now investigating this as a mass murder case. The discovery that the missing students and teachers had been murdered sent shockwaves through the Millbrook community and beyond. For 31 years, families had held onto hope that their children might still be alive somewhere, perhaps as victims of kidnapping who had been taken far from home. The reality that they had been killed so close to their intended destination, in the very lake they had been traveling to visit, was almost unbearable. As forensic analysis of Bus 47 continued, investigators began to piece together the timeline of what had happened on May 14, 1993. Based on the position of personal items inside the bus and other evidence, they determined that the students had likely been on the bus for some time before it entered the water, suggesting that they had been held captive for a period before being murdered. The examination also revealed that the bus had not gone directly into the lake from the shore. Sediment patterns and damage to the undercarriage indicated that Bus 47 had been driven through rough terrain before reaching the water, consistent with the dirt road access that investigators had identified. This suggested that whoever was responsible had knowledge of the local area and had planned the crime carefully. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the forensic examination was the discovery of evidence that the children had been aware of their situation before the bus entered the water. Notes and drawings found in the bus showed that some of the students had tried to communicate with each other and had attempted to break the windows to escape. The bravery and determination of these young victims in their final moments was both inspiring and devastating. Mrs. Mitchell's purse was found with the contents scattered but preserved, including a notebook where she had apparently tried to document what was happening to her and her students. The notebook contained partial entries that suggested she had been trying to keep the children calm while also documenting their situation, possibly hoping that the information would eventually help investigators solve the case. The forensic team also made the disturbing discovery that the bus had been deliberately weighted down to ensure it would sink quickly and remain hidden. Metal objects that were not original equipment had been added to the bus, and the vehicle had been positioned to take advantage of one of the deepest parts of the lake. Only the severe drought of 2024 had lowered water levels enough to make discovery possible. As news of these findings spread, the investigation expanded to include a thorough review of everyone who had been in the Millbrook area in May 1993 and who might have had the knowledge and opportunity to commit such a crime. The deliberate nature of the murders and the careful planning involved suggested that the perpetrator was someone familiar with both the local geography and the school's field trip plans. Detective Martinez assembled a task force that included FBI agents, state police investigators, and forensic specialists to handle what had become one of the most significant criminal cases in New York State history. "We're looking at this with fresh eyes and 31 years of advances in forensic science," she explained. "Technology that didn't exist in 1993 is now available to help us find the truth." One of the most promising developments was the discovery of DNA evidence that had been preserved in the cold, oxygen-poor environment of the lake bottom. Samples were collected from various locations in the bus and sent to the FBI laboratory for analysis. While DNA technology had been in its infancy in 1993, modern techniques could potentially identify genetic material from the perpetrator or perpetrators. The investigation also benefited from advances in digital forensics and data analysis. Phone records, financial transactions, and other electronic data from 1993 that had been stored but never fully analyzed were now being examined using sophisticated software that could identify patterns and connections that earlier investigators might have missed. Perhaps most importantly, the discovery of Bus 47 brought forward new witnesses who had remained silent for decades. Several local residents came forward with information about suspicious activities they had observed around Crystal Lake in May 1993, but had never reported because they hadn't understood the significance at the time. One of these witnesses was Robert Hartley, a retired park maintenance worker who had been working at Crystal Lake State Park in 1993. Hartley told investigators that he had seen a yellow school bus driving on the restricted dirt road that led to the remote area where Bus 47 had entered the water. At the time, he had assumed it was part of an authorized educational activity and hadn't thought to report it. "I saw the bus that morning, maybe around 10:30 or 11 Nisray," Hartley recalled. "I thought it was strange that they were using that old road instead of coming to the main visitor area, but I figured the rangers had approved some special activity. If I had known those kids were in danger, I would have done something." Another witness, Margaret Thompson, who had been a local resident in 1993, reported seeing a man in work clothes near the dirt road area on the morning of May 14th. She described him as appearing nervous or agitated and recalled that he had quickly left the area when he noticed her observing him. "I was out walking my dog early that morning and I saw this man by the road," Thompson told investigators. He had a baseball cap pulled down low, and when he saw me coming, he got in his truck and drove away fast. At the time, I just thought he was maybe dumping trash or something, but now I wonder if he was involved in what happened to those poor children. These witness accounts, combined with the physical evidence from Bus 47, began to paint a picture of a carefully planned crime that had involved at least one perpetrator with detailed knowledge of the local area and the school's field trip schedule. The fact that the crime had gone undetected for 31 years suggested that the responsible party had been successful in covering their tracks and avoiding suspicion. As forensic analysis continued, investigators also discovered evidence that the perpetrator or perpetrators had made attempts to dispose of other evidence in the lake. Divers searching the area around Bus 47 found items of clothing, tools, and other objects that appeared to be connected to the crime but were not original contents of the bus. Most significantly, the search revealed the presence of the submerged car that had been spotted near the bus. When this vehicle was raised and examined, investigators found that it belonged to Dale Morrison, a local handyman who had disappeared from Millbrook just 3 days after the school bus vanished in 1993. Morrison's disappearance had been investigated at the time, but police had assumed he had left town voluntarily due to financial problems and personal issues. The discovery of his car in Crystal Lake, near the location where Bus 47 had been hidden, suggested that Morrison might have been involved in the murders or had been a witness who was subsequently killed to ensure his silence. The discovery of Dale Morrison's car changes everything, Detective Martinez announced. We now have a potential suspect who was in the area at the time of the murders and who disappeared immediately afterward. Morrison had knowledge of local roads and terrain that would have been necessary to carry out this crime. Forensic examination of Morrison's car revealed evidence that supported the theory of his involvement in the school bus murders. Blood evidence was found in the vehicle that matched DNA samples from Bus 47, and the car showed signs of having been driven through the same rough terrain that the bus had traveled before entering the lake. However, the discovery also raised new questions about Morrison's role in the crime and his subsequent disappearance. Had he been the sole perpetrator who then committed suicide by driving into the lake? Had he been working with accomplices who then killed him to eliminate a witness? Or had Morrison himself been a victim who had stumbled upon the crime in progress? Dr. Walsh, the forensic pathologist, examined the remains found in Morrison's car and determined that he had died from a gunshot wound to the head. The bullet was still lodged in his skull, and ballistics analysis would be crucial in determining whether Morrison had committed suicide or been murdered. The evidence suggests that Dale Morrison died from a single gunshot wound, but we can't yet determine whether it was self-inflicted or inflicted by someone else, Dr. Walsh explained. The bullet trajectory and other factors will help us understand what happened, but it's clear that Morrison's death was connected to the school bus murders. As the investigation intensified, Detective Martinez and her team began conducting extensive background research on Dale Morrison, looking for clues about his possible motives for committing such a horrific crime or his potential connections to other suspects. What they discovered would shock the Millbrook community and reveal a conspiracy that had been hidden for over 3 decades. Morrison had worked as a maintenance contractor for the Millbrook School District and had detailed knowledge of school operations, including field trip schedules and transportation arrangements. More disturbing was the discovery that Morrison had been investigated in 1991 for inappropriate behavior around children, though charges had never been filed due to lack of evidence. The investigation also revealed that Morrison had significant financial debts in 1993 and had been facing potential bankruptcy. Phone records from the weeks leading up to the school bus disappearance showed that Morrison had been in contact with several individuals who investigators now suspected might have been involved in planning the crime. As these revelations emerged, it became clear that the murder of the Millbrook 20 had not been a random act of violence or the work of a single disturbed individual. Instead, the evidence suggested a complex conspiracy involving multiple perpetrators who had carefully planned and executed the crime for reasons that investigators were still working to understand. The discovery of Bus 47 and the subsequent investigation had answered some of the questions that had haunted Millbrook for 31 years, but it had also revealed that the full truth about what happened on May 14, 1993, was more complex and disturbing than anyone had imagined. As the investigation moved forward, families who had waited decades for answers were finally beginning to see justice for their murdered children, but they were also learning that the evil that had taken their loved ones was more extensive than they had ever feared. The breakthrough in the Millbrook 20 case came from an unexpected source. A deathbed confession recorded 3 months after the discovery of Bus 47. On June 15, 2024, Frank Kowalski, a 78-year-old former Millbrook resident dying of pancreatic cancer in a Buffalo hospital, contacted Detective Martinez with information that would finally expose the full scope of the conspiracy that had claimed 23 innocent lives. Kowalski had been Dale Morrison's business partner in 1993, running a small construction and maintenance company that had contracts with several local institutions, including the Millbrook School District. For 31 years, he had lived with the knowledge of what had really happened to the school bus and its passengers, but fear and guilt had kept him silent until he knew he was dying. "I can't take this to my grave," Kowalski told Detective Martinez in a recorded statement from his hospital bed. "Those families deserve to know the truth, and the people responsible need to face justice, even if it's too late for me." His confession would reveal a conspiracy motivated by greed, desperation, and a catastrophic failure of moral judgment that had cost the lives of 20 children and 3 adults. According to Kowalski, the plan to intercept Bus 47 had been conceived by Morrison and 2 other men: Richard "Rick" Patterson, a local businessman who owned several properties around Crystal Lake, and James Thornton, a former school district employee who had been fired for embezzlement in 1992. The 3 men had discovered that the school district was carrying a substantial insurance policy on student field trips, with payouts that could reach millions of dollars in the event of a catastrophic accident. Rick was facing bankruptcy because of bad real estate investments, Kowalski explained. Morrison owed money to dangerous people, and Thornton was bitter about losing his job and wanted revenge against the school district. They came up with this sick plan to stage an accident that would look like the bus had simply disappeared, then collect on the insurance money. The original plan, according to Kowalski, had not involved murder. The conspirators had intended to hijack the bus, hide the children and adults in a remote location until the insurance claim was processed, then release them with a story about being held by unknown kidnappers. However, the plan had gone catastrophically wrong when the children and Mrs. Mitchell had recognized Morrison from his work at the school. Dale panicked when he realized the kids knew who he was, Kowalski continued. Mrs. Mitchell was trying to keep the children calm, but she was also asking Dale questions about why he was doing this and telling him that the police would find them. Patterson and Thornton decided that letting them go was too risky, that they would all go to prison if the victims could identify them. The decision to murder 23 innocent people had been made in a moment of desperation and moral cowardice. Patterson, who according to Kowalski was the leader of the group, had convinced the others that they had gone too far to turn back. The plan was modified to eliminate all witnesses and make the disappearance permanent, with the insurance money still the ultimate goal. Kowalski's confession provided investigators with the detailed timeline they needed to understand exactly what had happened on May 14, 1993. Bus 47 had been intercepted approximately 5 miles from Millbrook by Morrison, who had used his familiarity with the route and the trust of driver Hal Morrison, no relation, to flag down the bus under the pretense of a road closure ahead. Dale told Hal that there had been a mudslide on the main road and that he needed to take a detour through the back roads to get to Crystal Lake, Kowalski recounted. Hal trusted Dale because he knew him from the school, and Mrs. Mitchell didn't object because she thought it was just a route change. The kids were excited because they thought they were going on an adventure. The bus had been directed to a remote area where Patterson and Thornton were waiting with additional vehicles and equipment. The original plan had been to transfer the passengers to other vehicles for transport to a hidden location, but when Morrison was recognized, the situation had escalated rapidly. According to Kowalski, Thornton had produced a gun and threatened the adults, while Patterson attempted to convince them that they would be released unharmed if they cooperated. However, Mrs. Mitchell had continued to ask questions and had tried to use her cell phone to call for help, forcing the conspirators to confiscate all communication devices and restrain the adults. The kids were scared, but they trusted Mrs. Mitchell, and she was trying to stay calm for their sake, Kowalski said. But when Patterson realized that Mrs. Mitchell had managed to send a partial text message before they took her phone, he decided that they couldn't risk letting any of them live. The decision to murder the victims had been carried out with cold calculation. The conspirators had driven the bus to the remote access road leading to Crystal Lake, with Patterson following in his vehicle and Thornton driving a truck loaded with weights and tools. Morrison had been forced to drive the bus into the lake while the passengers were still aboard, with the emergency exits locked to prevent escape. Dale didn't want to do it, Kowalski revealed. He was crying and saying he couldn't murder children, but Patterson threatened to kill Dale's wife and daughter if he didn't follow through. Dale felt he had no choice but to save his own family, even though it meant sacrificing those innocent kids. The most horrifying aspect of Kowalski's confession was his description of the final moments of the victims. The children and adults had realized what was happening as the bus entered the water, and their desperate attempts to escape had been blocked by the locked emergency exits and windows that had been secretly reinforced to prevent breaking. Morrison had escaped from the bus as it filled with water, but the psychological trauma of what he had done had led to a complete mental breakdown. According to Kowalski, Morrison had been found by Patterson and Thornton several hours later, sitting by the lakeshore in a catatonic state, unable to speak or respond to questions. Dale was completely broken by what they made him do, Kowalski said. He kept saying the children's names over and over, and he couldn't stop crying. Patterson said Dale had become a liability and that he might confess or break down under police questioning. The decision to eliminate Morrison had been made by Patterson, who shot him in the head and disposed of his body and car in the same area of Crystal Lake where Bus 47 had been sunk. Thornton had helped weigh down Morrison's vehicle, and both men had worked to eliminate all physical evidence that could connect them to the crime. With Morrison dead and the bus hidden beneath 60 feet of water, Patterson and Thornton had proceeded with their insurance fraud scheme. Using forged documents and false witness statements, they had filed claims with multiple insurance companies, alleging that they had suffered financial losses due to the disappearance of the school bus and its passengers. The insurance fraud had initially been successful, with Patterson collecting over $2.3 million from various policies over the following months. Thornton had received a smaller but still substantial payout, and both men had used the money to resolve their financial problems and relocate to other states where they could avoid suspicion. Kowalski's role in the conspiracy had been limited but crucial. He had provided false alibi statements for Morrison and had helped dispose of evidence, including tools and equipment that had been used in the crime. In exchange, he had received $100,000 from Patterson's insurance proceeds, money that he had used to expand his construction business and relocate his family to Buffalo. "I've lived with this guilt for 31 years, Kowalski said as he concluded his confession. "Every day I thought about those children and what we did to them. I tried to tell myself that I didn't actually kill anyone, that I was just helping clean up afterward, but I know I'm just as responsible as the others." Armed with Kowalski's detailed confession, Detective Martinez and her team immediately began the process of locating and arresting the surviving conspirators. Richard Patterson was found living under an assumed name in Phoenix, Arizona, where he had built a successful real estate business using the proceeds from the insurance fraud. James Thornton had died of a heart attack in 2019, but investigators were able to confirm his identity and role in the conspiracy through financial records and other evidence. The arrest of Richard Patterson on July 8, 2024, was the culmination of 31 years of investigation and represented a moment of justice that many had thought would never come. Patterson, now 67 years old, was taken into custody at his luxury home in Scottsdale without incident, though he immediately denied any involvement in the Millbrook 20 case. "I don't know what you're talking about," Patterson told arresting officers. "I've never heard of Millbrook or any school bus. This is a case of mistaken identity." However, DNA evidence recovered from Bus 47, financial records showing the insurance payouts, and Kowalski's detailed confession provided investigators with overwhelming evidence of Patterson's guilt. The extradition of Patterson to New York and his subsequent arraignment drew national media attention, with families of the Millbrook 20 finally seeing someone held accountable for the murders of their children. Maria Rodriguez Jr., now 47 years old and representing several of the victim families, addressed the media outside the courthouse after Patterson's arraignment. "This doesn't bring back Emma or any of the other children, but it gives us something we've waited 31 years for. The truth and the beginning of justice," she said. "We know now that our children died because of the greed and cowardice of evil men, but we also know that they're finally going to be held accountable." The trial of Richard Patterson began on September 15, 2024. In a courtroom packed with family members, media representatives, and community members who had followed the case for decades. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh, who had been named specifically to handle the case, presented a methodical and devastating case built on Kowalski's confession, physical evidence from Bus 47, and 31 years of accumulated investigative work. Richard Patterson and his conspirators murdered 20 children and 3 adults for money, Walsh told the jury in her opening statement. They planned this crime carefully, executed it ruthlessly, and then lived comfortably for 3 decades on the proceeds of their evil. Today, we ask you to deliver the justice that has been delayed for far too long. The trial featured emotional testimony from family members who described the devastating impact of losing their children and living with uncertainty for over 3 decades. Dr. Robert Mitchell, Mrs. Sarah Mitchell's widower, testified about the dedicated teacher who had died trying to protect her students, and how her death had destroyed not only his life, but the lives of countless students who would never benefit from her teaching. Forensic experts testified about the evidence recovered from Bus 47, including DNA samples that definitively placed Patterson at the scene of the crime. Financial investigators detailed the complex insurance fraud scheme that had provided the motive for the murders, showing how Patterson had systematically collected payouts from multiple policies over several months following the disappearance. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Frank Kowalski, who had recovered enough from his cancer treatment to appear in court via video link from his hospital bed. Despite aggressive cross-examination from Patterson's defense attorneys, Kowalski's detailed account of the conspiracy remained consistent and credible. "I know I'm dying, and I have nothing to gain by lying," Kowalski told the jury. "I've carried this secret for 31 years, and it's destroyed my life and my family. Richard Patterson murdered those children for money, and he's lived like a king while their families suffered. He needs to pay for what he did." The defense attempted to argue that Kowalski's confession was unreliable due to his terminal illness and medication, and that the physical evidence was too degraded after 31 years underwater to be conclusive. However, the prosecution's case was overwhelming, supported by multiple forms of evidence and witness testimony that corroborated every aspect of Kowalski's account. On October 22, 2024, after deliberating for less than 6 hours, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all charges against Richard Patterson, including 23 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and kidnapping. The courtroom erupted in emotional scenes as family members who had waited over 3 decades for justice finally saw the man responsible for their children's deaths held accountable. "Justice has finally been served for the Millbrook 20, Detective Martinez announced after the verdict. "While nothing can bring back these innocent victims, their families can finally have closure, knowing that the person responsible for this heinous crime will spend the rest of his life in prison." During the sentencing phase of the trial, family members were given the opportunity to address Patterson directly and share the impact statements that many had been preparing for years. The testimony was heartbreaking and powerful, with parents, siblings, and other relatives describing how the murders had affected every aspect of their lives. "You stole my daughter's future, but you also stole mine," testified Carmen Garcia, whose son Anthony had been one of the victims. "For 31 years, I've wondered if he suffered, if he was scared, if he called for me before he died. Now I know the truth, and I know that you watched innocent children drown for money. I hope you think about their faces every day for the rest of your miserable life." On November 15, 2024, Judge Margaret Foster sentenced Richard Patterson to life in prison without the possibility of parole on each of the 23 murder counts, to be served consecutively. The sentence ensured that Patterson would spend the rest of his life behind bars, with no possibility of ever being released. "The murders of the Millbrook 20 represent one of the most heinous crimes in New York State history," Judge Foster said as she imposed the sentence. 20 innocent children and 3 dedicated educators were murdered in cold blood for the sake of insurance money. The defendant showed no mercy to his victims, and this court will show none to him. Brige. The resolution of the criminal case brought a measure of closure to the families of the Millbrook 20, but it also prompted a broader examination of the systemic failures that had allowed the conspiracy to succeed. Investigators discovered that the insurance policies that had motivated the murders had been improperly issued and inadequately investigated when claims were filed. Congressional hearings were held to examine insurance industry practices and regulatory oversight, leading to new federal legislation requiring enhanced verification procedures for large insurance claims and mandatory cooperation between insurers and law enforcement in cases involving suspicious disappearances. The Millbrook case also led to significant improvements in school transportation safety and emergency response protocols. GPS tracking systems became mandatory on all school buses in New York State, and new procedures were implemented for verifying route changes and responding to missing school transportation. The Millbrook 20 didn't die in vain if their deaths lead to changes that protect other children, said Dr. Mitchell during a memorial service held on the first anniversary of Bus 47's discovery. Sarah would have wanted her students' legacy to be improved safety for all children, and that's exactly what's happening. In addition to systemic reforms, the case prompted the creation of the Millbrook 20 Foundation, established with funds recovered from Patterson's assets and donations from supporters across the country. The foundation provides college scholarships for students pursuing careers in education or child safety, ensuring that the victim's memory lives on through the achievements of future generations. The foundation also funds research into improved emergency response systems for schools and supports families dealing with the trauma of violence against children. Maria Rodriguez Jr., who serves as the foundation's president, described its mission as transforming tragedy into hope. Emma and the other children can't fulfill their own dreams now, but we can help other young people achieve theirs, she explained. Every scholarship we provide, every safety improvement we fund, every family we help is a way of honoring our children's memory and making sure their deaths had meaning. The discovery of Bus 47 and the resolution of the Millbrook 20 case also had a profound impact on the broader true crime community and cold case investigation practices. The case demonstrated the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining open investigations even when cases seem hopeless, as new technology and changing circumstances can provide unexpected breakthroughs decades later. Dr. Amanda Chen, the marine archaeologist whose drought research had led to the discovery of the bus, became an advocate for using environmental changes as opportunities to solve cold cases. She worked with law enforcement agencies to identify other bodies of water where evidence from unsolved crimes might be hidden, leading to the discovery of additional vehicles and remains in cases dating back decades. The Millbrook case shows us that nature can be both a concealer and a revealer of evidence, Dr. Chen explained. Climate change, droughts, floods, and other environmental events create opportunities to find evidence that has been hidden for years. We need to be ready to take advantage of these opportunities when they arise. The psychological impact of finally solving the Millbrook 20 case extended far beyond the immediate families of the victims. The entire town of Millbrook had lived under the shadow of the unsolved disappearance for 31 years, and the resolution brought a complex mixture of relief, grief, and renewed trauma. Community counseling services were expanded to help residents process the revelation that their children had been murdered by people they had known and trusted. The discovery that Dale Morrison, who had been a familiar figure in the community, had participated in the murders was particularly devastating for many long-time residents. Learning the truth was both a blessing and a curse, reflected Margaret Thompson, who had witnessed suspicious activity near Crystal Lake on the day of the murders. We finally had answers, but the answers were more horrible than anything we had imagined. It's hard to accept that people we knew were capable of such evil. The case also prompted a re-examination of other unsolved disappearances and crimes in the region as investigators looked for potential connections to the network of criminals that had been responsible for the Millbrook murders. While no direct connections were found, the investigation led to renewed interest in several cold cases and provided new leads for investigators to pursue. Frank Kowalski died peacefully in his sleep on December 3, 2024, just 2 weeks after Patterson's sentencing. His family reported that his final weeks had been marked by a sense of peace and relief, that he had finally revealed the truth about the Millbrook 20. His cooperation with investigators had been crucial in solving the case and bringing justice to the victims' families. Frank carried a terrible burden for 31 years, and it ate away at him every day, his daughter, Patricia Kowalski, said at his funeral. He wasn't a perfect man, and he made terrible choices, but in the end, he did the right thing. He gave those families the truth they deserved, even though he knew it would destroy his own reputation and legacy. As 2024 drew to a close, the Millbrook community began the process of healing and moving forward with the knowledge of what had happened to their missing children. The memorial garden at the elementary school was expanded to include new plaques describing the resolution of the case and honoring the memory of all 23 victims. Annual memorial services continued, but they took on a different character now that the families had definitive answers about their loved ones' fate. Instead of gatherings marked by uncertainty and unanswered questions, the services became celebrations of the victims' lives and affirmations of the community's commitment to protecting children and pursuing justice. We'll never stop missing Emma and the other children, but we can finally grieve properly now that we know what happened to them, Maria Rodriguez Jr. said during the memorial service on May 14, 2025, exactly 32 years after the murders. They died because of human evil, but their memory lives on through all the good that has come from their case being solved. The story of the Millbrook 20 became a powerful reminder of the importance of never giving up on seeking justice for victims of violent crime. The case showed that even when investigations seem hopeless and decades pass without progress, persistence, new technology, and sometimes simply the passage of time can provide the breakthroughs needed to solve even the most baffling mysteries. Detective Martinez, who had worked on the case for over 30 years, reflected on its impact during her retirement ceremony in 2025. The Millbrook 20 taught me that our job as law enforcement officers is to never stop fighting for victims and their families, she said. Sometimes justice is delayed, but it should never be denied. Those 20 children and 3 adults deserved justice, and I'm proud that we were finally able to deliver it. Today, the yellow school bus that had carried the Millbrook 20 to their deaths was eventually moved to a secure storage facility where it serves as evidence and a somber reminder of the tragedy. Plans are underway to eventually display portions of Bus 47 in a museum dedicated to school safety and the memory of the victims, ensuring that future generations will remember their story and the lessons learned from their deaths. Today, Crystal Lake State Park includes a memorial to the Millbrook 20 near the area where Bus 47 was discovered. The memorial features a bronze plaque with the names of all 23 victims and a simple inscription, "In memory of 20 children and 3 adults who died on May 14, 1993, while pursuing the joy of learning. May their legacy be a safer world for all children." Visitors to the memorial often leave flowers, stuffed animals, and personal notes, creating an ongoing tribute to young lives cut short by unspeakable evil. The site has become a place of pilgrimage for people touched by the story of the Millbrook 20, and a reminder that even in the face of the worst human cruelty, love, memory, and justice can ultimately prevail. The discovery of Bus 47 in Crystal Lake ended 31 years of questions and uncertainty, but it also began a new chapter in the story of the Millbrook 20. Their deaths, which had been senseless acts of greed and violence, became catalysts for positive change that protected other children and improved the systems designed to keep them safe. In death, they had achieved something that would have made their teachers proud. They had taught the world important lessons about courage, justice, and the enduring power of truth.